today for the devotional, I thought I'd just do something a little differently. And I thought I'd just talk a little bit about something in psychology that an experiment that had been done years ago, and it's often talked about in the psychological sphere, called the Milgram Experiment. And it's an interesting, very interesting, controversial study. And I've often found it interesting to go and look at it and to examine its outcomes and such. It's fascinating. Basically, if you don't know what the Milgram Experiment is, you can pause it and go take a look if you want, somewhere on the internet. But just as a brief explanation here, the Milgram Experiment was, the guy who conducted it, last name was Milgram, so that's why it's called that. But the experiment was basically they brought people in to a room, and they had a panel against a wall with all these these dials and buttons or whatever, and there was the tester, and so they thought they knew they were being part of some sort of a psychological experiment. They knew there was something like that going on. So there was the person conducting the test sitting off to one side, and then they were sit at this panel, and then they were told that it was this teaching tool, and that basically there was a person on the other side of the wall that had these answers they had to give, and if they gave the wrong answer or whatever, then the person was supposed to press the button that would give them an electrical shock, and so then the shock was supposed to motivate them to do better on the next part of the test. And so the person would do this. So this person was told just to ask the question and then press the button if the person got it wrong and shock them. Now, on the other side of the wall, they had an actor. That person wasn't actually taking the test. That person knew everything that was happening, and he wasn't actually hooked up to anything, but he was going to act as if he was getting shocked. And the whole point was to see how far these people would go in pressing the electrical button, because every time the guy got it wrong, they were supposed to turn up the intensity of the electrical shock, the voltage or whatever, turn it up a bit. And so they would do this. So they would ask the question, the guy would get it wrong, and they'd zap him, and they'd hear on the other side of the wall, they'd hear him go, and be like, oh, okay. And so then they'd turn it up a little, and they'd go to the next one, and they'd ask him, and they'd press the button again, and they'd hear, ah! Okay, and then they'd turn it up a little more, and then they would go on, and until the point where the guy was screaming out in agony, or what they thought he was. I mean, they didn't know he was an actor, but and then people would start to get very uncomfortable with what's happening here, because the guy on the other side of the wall was really in pain, and so they would turn to the person giving the test, who was sitting there in his lab coat with a clipboard and just observing, and they would turn to him. They're like, he's really in pain, and the person would just answer, please continue. And so they would go on, and then the person would start to plead, I don't want to do this anymore, and then they would go on, and they would, every time the subject would turn to the tester and protest, the tester would just simply say, please continue. And the person would continue, and in some cases, all the way up to a lethal shock level. And the person on the other side of the wall would go silent, and they would still continue. Some people would still continue to press the button. So it became a very controversial experiment, because these poor people were put through this agonizing moment, this emotionally agonizing moment of thinking they were killing somebody or hurting somebody. And it was a shocking experiment because it was this whole idea of, look how far a person would go. And it's sobering to think that human beings, all of us, would have that potential. That we all like to think, no, if I had took the experiment, I wouldn't have done it. I don't know. I mean, they tried in a lot of people, and it was pretty strong results that we tend to do this. Now, the whole point of their experiment was they were trying to decide how far will people go when they're listening to an authority figure. So that the tester was the authority figure, and the whole idea was, if this person with the coat on and with the clipboard saying please continue was this authority figure that would tell them to go forward, so how far would a person go before they would defy the authority, was the idea. And so that's what the whole test was meant to be about. And it's really interesting. I mean, we think that probably is a large part of what they discovered in that test. So I think it's a very interesting test. But a little piece of it that I wonder about, that I haven't really heard a lot of people ever talk about, is I wonder how much the visuals had to do with the outcomes in that experiment. Now, the fact that the subject was hidden behind a wall, the actor was hidden behind a wall, I understand that it would be easier for him to do his acting if he couldn't be seen, but I wonder how much of effect it had, the fact that he was hidden behind a wall, where the person giving the electrical volt couldn't see. He could hear, but he couldn't see what was happening. And I wonder how much effect the visuals of the white lab coat and the clipboard had on the affair, on the event, if they had not given that authority figure those very authoritative symbols. Would they have gone far? If they could see the actor, would the agony of the actor, the pretended agony of the actor, motivate them more so to stop doing what they were doing? I wonder about that, because there is this real thing about when you dehumanize someone, the more you're able to make them less human, dehumanize them, then the easier it is for us to decide that is not really a bad thing happening here. We can convince ourselves much more easily when you can't see the person as a person, or when you don't see the authority as a person, but rather just simply as this authority figure. It's a real thing. They say seeing is believing, or a picture is worth 1,000 words, or out of sight, out of mind. And I think there is such a strong connection between our visuals and our ability to see someone as a person that it does affect things like that. And I've wondered that with the Milgram experiment. It's the same with other things. Now, for instance, the whole idea of the abortion issue in our land. This debate over this whole thing is a passionate debate between the two sides. I'm on the pro-life side. As a Christian, I believe that every life matters, right down to the child in the womb. But it's an interesting debate, just for the sake of our talk today. It's just interesting to think about how when people start, when the what do they call it, the ultrasound, when the ultrasound images were brought to the public, when they started giving those to parents, how many people changed side on that debate to the pro-life side as a result. It was a notable change in society, a very notable change once the ultrasound, once you could see the child in the womb. It changed a lot of people's minds, because now you couldn't dehumanize the child as easily. Now it was a person. And we do this. I mean, we do this with other things. Photojournalism. How many different policies and governmental things and movements have been formed by the fact that somebody with a camera was able to go and see the Vietnam War, or the Croatian War, or even the Crimean War, or the famines in Africa, or the protests in various parts of the world. And when there was images put on the people in it, and you could see them, and you couldn't dehumanize them as easily. They were real people. You saw them. And I wonder how much that's affected us on the things like the abortion debate. You know, there's a scripture in the Bible in Psalm 139, verse 13 to 16. It says, "For you formed my inward parts. You wove me in my mother's womb. I will give thanks to you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, and my soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in secret and skillfully wrought in the depths of the earth. Your eyes have seen my unformed substance, and in your book were all written the days that were ordained for me, when as yet there was not one of them." And then you get this beautiful poetic imagery of God forming us in our mother's wombs, and he just uses this poetic language, but this secret place that God forms us, and he sees us. Even if the people out here can't see us, he sees us. And we are a person in that place, real person in that place. And that person is human and worth something. I wonder how often in our life we dehumanize people by making caricatures of them, or hiding them behind things, or masking them, or whatever it is we do. I wonder how often we make it easier to think that a person is out of misery just because we put them out of life and we don't see them anymore. You know, I think sometimes we've become slaves to this, and sometimes we've allowed ourselves to remove the humanness of a person by simply erasing their image from our sight. And it's not a good thing. I think that we could learn a lot from Scripture, and when we look at something like that and realize, yeah, God always sees the person, and they are still a person. Just because they're out of our sight, or because we've erased their image, doesn't mean they're not a person. God cares about the people, and so should we. Something to think about today.